I'd like to just begin the question and answer by asking all of our panelists, in light of what we heard this morning, for example, in the talk on Ochre and what we've also heard in casual conversation, how should we be thinking about archiving and preserving these very elaborate, quite wonderful three-dimensional or 3D photography or big, larger data-intensive components as a particular type of data that we should think about in a way that can be archived and saved so that it doesn't turn into a dead link, for example.
That's a great question, and it's really difficult because you have a lot of web-based solutions for looking at the 3D data. But it depends on, it's so different and complex. Yeah, an image is a very different thing, right? Because you have like a JPEG or a PNG or a TIFF, and it's a single thing. But 3D, you will have the OBJ, the MTL, FBX, you'll have so many different types of proprietary data formats, and you have entire scenes. It's way more complicated. So one of the things I do is archive Matterports. That's the place where I started, and you can save every little piece of every high-resolution image that you take from the 3D scanner, and then you can look it up again in the future as just a basic HTML document. But archiving a neural network is super interesting as well, because it's just a single model file with the matrix.
Yeah, I think it's something that we definitely haven't cracked at our museum. We were talking just casually and saying how we don't even have a standardized database for all of our collections. We still have different databases, different structures, including, we think, like drives in people's drawers and stuff. So, but I think as we're seeing more and more of this kind of data, we're going to have to address that and have it be, part of this overarching structure of like, how do we store these big files, right? These big data files. I think one thing that we can look to is how we're storing large video files, frankly. We are starting to archive from our communications department, all the videos, all the interviews that we've done, and those can get very large as we're looking at raw footage. So I think we're probably going to look at that and the data stores that we're using there when we're talking about these large data structures, but not cracked yet.
Yeah, like you said, we haven't cracked it yet successfully, but we have discussion about centralized system and starting from small scale, like we did with a little experiment with collection scope, taking a little small portion of our collection and really use that as an example and discuss about what's the standardized format, what's the commonly used thing. Another challenge we confronted is we can store it somewhere, but not everybody has 3D viewer. So you know how to view images, you know how to view videos, but yeah, 3D viewer, so not everybody has that on their computer. So there are a lot of steps we have to go through. First, we need a lot of storage space and the centralized system server, format, everything. So we are discussing all that. And probably we're going to do step by step with small scale, some part of our collection.
I think archiving for Asian Art Museum is a huge challenge because I think traditionally we tend to create a publication right before the opening of the exhibition, and then that's it. But then the situation with contemporary art, and I guess not just contemporary art, but other exhibitions as well, you have so many conversations actually generated by these exhibitions that happen along the way, and even after the exhibition is over. So at least with my department right now, I'm really trying to build a model that we don't produce a publication until the show is over, which is a very, very different way of the traditional way of publishing. But also, and it was very interesting this morning to hear about the publication and archiving, because I was also seeing, and I think museum does not have capacity to do that, actually, but education institution does. And so far, one of them I have seen is what Stanford has done for Martin Wong, and I felt like that resonate was done so well. And thinking about nowadays, all people, well, many people, younger generation, like to do the research online only. And so we need to occupy that platform a lot more aggressively. So I feel digital publishing and digital archiving is definitely the way to go, but the archiving for during the exhibition and post-exhibition is very important, for me at least. That's the direction I'm trying to push.
I think when I actually say look, like when you actually make a 3D modeling from the photogrammetry, we actually have a really big file with a big polygon. But I think for actually our exhibition app, we actually, for our performance, we actually need to really reduce the size because if it's heavy, it needs more loading. It's everything make it laggy. So I make it all the highlights model first, and then I try to actually step by different size and to optimize for our exhibition app.
Thank you for showing us all these wonderful projects, very different contexts. And in general, everything that was shown today and yesterday, I think it's wonderful. I'd like to thank again the organizers for inviting us here. I wanted to ask the AMNH team about the process. If you can give us a glimpse about your process from the beginning, from the ideation stage. I mean, who comes up with the ideas? Is it your teams? Do you get together, you have ideas, or does somebody come and say, okay, we want to do this, especially for your new education center? And then when you go along, do you evaluate with your visitors? Is it a participatory design process, or how do you go about it? I'm very jealous, as I said in the break. If I can come and work with your team, I'd love to.
It is a lot of fun. Yeah, I can speak at least for exhibitions. So we're very privileged to have a small team in-house. Haley and I, on our exhibitions media, we only have 3 other full-time people in our department for our media. And for example, in the Gilder Center, we have 27 media pieces that are in that Gilder Center. We've been working on it for years, but still, it's a lot for a small group. We hire freelancers and do other things, but we do, we take care of the management and the production in-house. So starting from ideation, at least for our temporary exhibits, we do have a lot of internal discussion with our curators and what is important for them, what is new in research and in their fields, what should we be thinking about for exhibition topics. The next one that's coming out, we're working on elephants right now for a temporary exhibit. It'll be out in November. And so we speak with our curators and we come up with ideas as well, like looking at the zeitgeist, what are people talking about, and start coming up with ideas for a show. There's ideas come from all sorts of places in our museum, and it's wonderful. It's great that we are a part of this process. We brainstorm for our media pieces within our media team. We bring ideas to the table, and sometimes there's also other voices, both in the administration or in our scientific staff, that also have ideas for media projects, and we love hearing those. We love being able to say oh yes, that's a great idea. I think we could do it in this way, or this is how we could make that happen. We do, so we from ideation to production, we work on it in-house. We do user testing and things, but nothing is quite like seeing it out on the floor. As much user testing as we do, and we try to do, people act differently when we're standing there and watching them using our pieces, using our interactives. In fact, we just had, as a good example, the collection core that we were showing with those big 100-inch touchscreens. We had tested those. We had one up in our office for months. Yeah, a long time. We had invited people in, we had invited kids in to try these things out, and everyone was very dutifully going through and trying things out. And the first time we had the public, we had a members' night. I got reports that you could swipe from the side of the screen and get into Windows. That we hadn't discovered that yet in all of our testing. And anyway. So yes, we having things out on the floor and then quickly iterating. Sometimes that's how we end up finding things that aren't working well or that need to be improved. It's really a great benefit of being an in-house team is that we live with it. The things that we put out on the floor, we live with, and so we are there and we watch, we evaluate, we see what's working, what's not, and can change things as we go. Our temporary exhibits, I think we do that for just about all of our media exhibits and our temporary exhibits for sure, where we'll stand there with a clipboard and watch people for a lot in the first month at least that a show is open. But
yeah, so personally, I think the most fun part of why I'm making the interactive installation in our team is like there are so many like persons I can ask. Like for example, like Indigo Table, I like ask a writer who actually researched it for a few months, and then there's a curator, and there's like curator knows like some other like expertise. So like it's really fun like to have like having kind of making interactive installation, but have a lot of like graphic team had the idea and like editorial team had the idea. So that's a really like I'm appreciate to work in our team.
I think these guys gave great answers, so I'll just add a little bit. So our process is a little different because we experiment with new technologies a lot. So for a while, we identify ourselves as emerging media lab. So what we did had more excuses. It doesn't need to be so safe, but we can be brave and like do something fun. So what I learned by working at the museum for 8 years straight in the same place, like anybody can initiate the project. So basically, sometimes scientists become our client, and then we become our own client. We have ideas to bring up, and then contact scientists, and they're researchers, and then they're like, oh, I saw you work with my friend researcher, so can you do the same thing with my research? So, that's how things happen. And as they said, we are all in the same building. So knowing those people and just showing our work, and this is why, part of the reason why we are here, because we want to share our work. So my learning is basically we follow the very standard production process, like ideate, design, test, prototype, and production, and rounds, iterative design process. But how we start is every time is different. So that's the part I found very interesting.
Well, thank you for this panel, wonderful panel, really learned a lot. I have a question for Abby. Thank you for introducing this really quite exciting exhibition. And it made me think about this key concept of cyberpunk, as we all know, because cyberpunk has this kind of ideological baggage in that, it is imagined high-tech no life, therefore trying to create a kind of alienated subject that doesn't feel it has a it have any space in the society, and then try to somehow have a space in the dystopian future, right? So there's a certain animosity and struggle there, and then that dystopian future sometimes they're projected to Asian cities and all that. So it's interesting to hear you discuss Kong Hee's growing up in the sort of median-scape or atmosphere where he obviously that kind of Japanese anime, all these cyberpunk kind of culture seeped into his sensibility. But he apparently also was not entirely sharing that ethos. He probably just used it as a formal language without embracing that ideological stance or position. So I just want to hear your thoughts about, because you worked with him, so I try to figure out, like, okay, is it just borrowing the cyberpunk formal apparatus without really getting at the crust of the cyberpunk? Yeah.
That's a great question, and I'll answer it in two folds. One is the aesthetics just on the visual language, and then the second part is how he himself view Asian futurism and the appropriation. So on the visual side of it, we were talking to Disney Plus, their diversity officer, who is African American, also deeply engaged with Afrofuturism. So he was looking at Conky's timeline, and then he was like, wow, you guys actually were 2 years ahead of this kind of a trend of using highly saturated color and express this dystopian kind of future. So that part he was very original, but because Hong Kong doesn't have an animation industry, so this is an artist that was very determined that he's still gonna make animation. So with this kind of like a small scale, individual, small collective way. So that's why there's this really raw quality of his animation that is very different from the industry animation. So that's the first on the visual aesthetic. The second part is really about he's growing up, his experience with Hollywood or Japanese anime, particularly Hollywood using Asian neon city, like exoticizing Shanghai, exoticizing Hong Kong, like as a backdrop. But then what is really interesting was, even though that was a language he grew up with, he then reappropriate the appropriation and then reclaim it and then re-establish his own agency, which I thought that part was very important. And that's exactly how I felt about Asian Art Museum when I first got there, how these labels and how they're separated by nation, and then how, like, with all of this underpinning of that colonial tone. And then I feel like it is our object, and it was our narrative got a little bit respinned, but then how do we reclaim it? And so that idea of eliminating that alienation I had with these objects, I was not able to do it until I start working with Conky's material. So I feel like that whole narrative liberated us. So yeah, that was my response to the question.
Oh, yeah, thank you. Hi, I actually work with Abby at the Asian Art Museum, do marketing and communications, and my question is actually a follow-up to the one from AMNH, which is, in the exhibition media that you're creating for inside the museum, are you also putting all of that on the website in some way, and are you working with marketing to drive traffic to those offerings online?
Yeah, we don't put everything on,
Yeah.
but we are often requested to put everything on. Our marketing group, communications group, same thing. When we're making digital media, they're always saying, let's put it online. We've already got it in digital form. Frankly, some of the things like the Northwest Coast kiosks are created with web technology. So, it's already web native. And I think there's this balance of the experience in the hall being different from an experience at home, and really kind of tailoring that for those two different experiences. So we work hard on that. We provide assets, and our web team also thinks about that, and some stuff just works a lot better when you're sitting at home in front of your computer or on your phone than it does in the hall, and some things work better in the hall, right? Yeah. And so there is a dialogue there, and we are trying to put more and more on our website, especially for all the many millions of people who won't ever step foot inside our museum, right? Exactly. So yeah, it's definitely a priority, but it's a whole other project in that we're trying to share assets and make that happen, but there's a lot of considerations.
Excellent, thank you.
Luke, I was hoping you could just elaborate in a little more layperson terms what the neural radiance fields means in practice to folks who are trying to digitize stuff.
Yeah. It's all new to me also, so it's tough. But I think it's really important and it's very useful because for 3D capturing an environment, you could take a 1 minute smartphone capture of this space and already have something useful as a virtual tour. It's neural radiance fields means neural network is what is underlying it. So you feed all of your images into this single model, and instead of having like a 3D asset at the end of it, you just have the model, which is like a bunch of numbers in a really big matrix. Then the radiance part is it describes for each point in space, like, is there light in that point and what's the density of it, like an RGB value and then a density of that point. And then the field is because it's a discrete, like algebraic function, like a field, like you can get different resolutions from it. If you want to query it for a 512 by 512 image of just this wall, you can get that from it. Or if you want a 4K image of that wall, it's the same process, it's the same function. You just shoot a bigger ray bundle. So that's the main thing. And at the end of the day, you just have a single model file and you can package it with a Docker container for the steps for reproducibility for archiving in the future.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much to all of our panelists for the afternoon session. And I believe our next speaker is Wu Hong.